So it seems that the Eldar Codex are going to be getting a move-shoot-move mechanic, units being able to shoot but not be shot. It's very Eldar, very tricksy, and certainly has the potential to be just a little bit broken. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking another Eldar preview, and this time Games Workshop have given us another key part in the Eldar Codex puzzle, in a look at the full rules for the Battle Focus special rule. This one's been rumoured for really quite a long time to be a move-shoot-move mechanic, the second move just being d6 inches, and that does appear to be exactly what it is. I thought it was best to reserve judgment though until we have actually seen it in full, and until we know roughly what it applies to. So who does this rule apply to then, and what exactly does it do? From the leaked datasheets that we've seen throughout the Eldar Codex, it does appear that the battle focus will apply to infantry and jet bikes. We've seen things like aspect warriors and the shroud runners get access to the rule, but it appears that things like wraith units and vehicles might well not be getting this. Harlequins also appear not to be able to access battle focus either. Again, they do seem to be doing their own thing within the Eldari Codex. They appear to get their Harlequins Panoply and the Rising Crescendo rules, so largely seem to be getting fairly similar rules to what they had before. I don't know if there's going to be any other specific restrictions as to who gets this and who doesn't. I do wonder whether or not it's going to be on the Dark Reaper datasheet or not once we find it out. In the current Eldar Codex they don't get it, in general because they tend to be slow-moving reaping obliterators, theoretically, as opposed to being a unit that can move, shoot, move, and are jumping around the battlefield, although that is kind of at odds with how they're often played, as they often make good use of that fire and fade stratagem. They certainly seem like they could be a problem unit though, if they do get battle focus applied to them. In addition, I think that this is likely to be a rule that the Eldar get even if they do ally with other Eldari factions. I believe it's going to be the Strands of Fate rule is the one that they'll only be able to get if they're pure craft worlds. I feel like this one's just going to be a datasheet ability applying to certain units. Largely infantry and jet bikes. I've got no idea about war walkers, potentially some of the grav tanks if they take the vectored engines upgrade, which is rumoured to give them a once per game battle focus. In any case, the rule has been massively amped up from the previous version. Before, battle focus basically allowed you to fire all weapons besides heavy weapons as if you'd remain stationary, even if you decided to advance. It allowed you to basically always get that extra d6 inch movement unless you really wanted to charge, and it certainly feels quite Eldar, running around the battlefield at breakneck speed, dealing out accurate death. The new version does kind of retain this rule in spirit. It's kind of become a two-part composite rule. The first bit with advancing and shooting now has become a tiny bit more restrictive. It's now only assault weapons and pistols that get the no penalty when you are advancing, so they won't any longer be able to advance and shoot with things like grenade weapons or rapid fire weapons. Admittedly, I can't really think of many rapid fire weapons off the top of my head that the Eldar have access to. Still though, that bit's very useful indeed, particularly good on any advance and charge units like Howling Banshees. It means they can still be snapping off their shuriken shots at full accuracy while they close with the foe. Really though, the exciting and possibly slightly broken bit is the move shoot move part, where basically in the shooting phase you get to move d6 inches after shooting. Though there are a few restrictions on when you can do it. You can only do it if you've not advanced, fallen back, and if you don't plan to charge the enemy, as using battle focus like this prevents you from charging later in the turn. All of those kind of seem sensible and expected, otherwise you'd be getting 2 sets of plus d6 inch movement per turn if you could do it when advancing, and if you could charge after it, you'd just be able to use it as a massive extra charge threat boost. As well as that, you can't use it after arriving by reinforcements, part of the normal restrictions on not moving after you've dropped down from reserve. And perhaps pragmatically, they've also made sure that you can't use it to embark in a transport. That certainly was a very common manoeuvre with Dark Reapers and Wave Serpents with Fire and Fade, so they'll just have to be playing around regular line of sight blocking terrain, not hopping into a Wave Serpent to keep them safe from enemy shooting, then emerging once more to fire again. Again, probably for the best, so we don't just have a whole phalanx of Wave Serpents, with squads kind of weirdly jumping out, shooting, and then hiding back in again. In general though, this battle focus rule just seems incredibly powerful. Theoretically, it does mean that you could potentially have quite a lot of an Eldar gun line that could just nose into line of sight in their turn, and then use the d6 inches just to drop back and hide out of line of sight again, once they've unleashed all their nasty brutal shooting into your army. I guess perhaps one of the easiest ways of doing it might just be to nose outside of a brewing wall, fire your guns, and then on most rolls you are easily going to be able to make it back and hide once more. You could perhaps achieve the same power by just putting the edge of your base onto an obscuring terrain piece and then using battle focus to fall back behind it, or even just using the edge of an obscuring terrain piece just to nose the edge of your model round it so they can only just see the enemy unit, and then using battle focus to hide out of line of sight once more. I feel like it could just be the sort of rule that creates a fair amount of bad feeling if you potentially got an entire Eldar gun line shooting at you, and almost all of it can't be shot because you can't see the things. It feels like this sort of thing could be really easy to achieve on things like Eldari jet bikes. For example, those Shroud runners just putting out hails of scatter laser shots and a sniper rifle each, using their enormous movement to make sure that they're in the optimal position for getting line of sight and then falling away, and then using battle focus to stay safe. The same easily could go for just Eldar units moving up into the midfield though, maybe things like fire dragons popping out, blowing something up, and then retreating into cover so at least they're harder to engage, and the same with things like Guardians, Dire Avengers, Warp Spiders, or many more. I think it's going to be a massively big deal if Dark Reapers do suddenly acquire this. If Games Workshop gives them battle focus, it feels like it could be a really easy include in an army to have several small squads of Dark Reapers, their long range pretty much guaranteeing shooting on the enemy, then hiding back out of line of sight. Even if you're not doing gamey things with terrain though, there's still other ways that you could apply it. Even if an Eldar squad had weapons that weren't grenade or pistol weapons, then the extra d6 movement could still mean that they're essentially getting a free advance. The only stipulation being that you have to use it after you're shooting, not before, so you could use that to close with your enemy or get towards objectives. Seems like it could be good for things like bikes with scatter lasers. Now they appear to have become heavy weapons, that means that you could move normally, still shoot with them, and then still gain extra movement. And it just seems that virtually every single Eldar unit with this rule is just going to have a very slight positioning advantage over their enemy. In general, it seems that the foes of the Eldar might well need to be fast enough to close the gap and see around line of sight blocking terrain to engage things, make good use of Ignore's line of sight firepower, things like those Orc Squig buggies or maybe Tau smart missile systems, or just be prepared to either tank heavy incoming fire or make equally good use of line of sight blocking terrain themselves. I would still say that there's perhaps a fair few weaknesses with this rule though. I think that the fact that it's a random d6-inch move is actually quite a good touch, as the Eldar player does risk some of their units being caught flat-footed, as you can't re-roll this with command point re-rolls as far as I can tell. If you are jumping to just outside a ruin wall, I think in general that means that a 1-inch roll is not going to allow you to fall back behind the ruin, as most models that even have a 25mm base are generally not going to be able to make the distance to jump over the ruin wall, which generally tends to be a few millimeters thick at least. It does just mean unless you're doing something a bit more reliable, like only nosing the corner of your base into the obscuring terrain, you do have a chance of a few random Eldar being exposed. It also means that if you do take any penalties to hit for moving with things like heavy weapons, then you would still take those, as the Eldar player would usually have to move with, say, the Rangers. They'd be hitting on 3s rather than 2s if they want to keep on doing move shoot move all game. The rule does only appear to apply to certain sections of the Eldar Codex. A lot of the things that you probably want this on are odds are not to have it, and a lot of more melee focused troops just really won't care all that much in the first place. Finally, I do feel that several of the most powerful Eldar units that actually want to make use of this often have fairly short ranged weapons. Things like perhaps shuriken weapons which aren't enormously long ranged, fire dragon fusion guns, or warp spider death spinners. All of those, even with battle focus, are going to mean that you're going to need to close the gap with the enemy, come into the midfield, and hopefully at least the opponent would have some counterplay, either being able to charge them with fast units or jump round the edges of their terrain that they're hiding in. So it does sound like there will be some counterplay. Still though, I do think that this is looking like a monstrously powerful rule, and with move shoot move abilities like this, it does have the potential to create a bit of bad feeling on the tabletop. Rules like this have existed in various forms throughout 40k's history. They're often just really quite a slog to fight against, even when they are well balanced. It's just annoying not to be able to interact with your opponent's units meaningfully if they do position them well. In any case, let me know what you think. Is this rule going to make Eldar horrendous to fight against? Or will the fact that it mainly applies to a small amount of fairly close range units mean it's not as big a deal as it might look? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep any news of the new Eldar Codex coming. I try and release regular 40k videos every day, with plenty of discussion of Games Workshop's news and releases. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.